So, which camera do I look at when I read this?
Why don't you start talking to the drone?
Okay, the drone. Hello, my name is Liza Murphy, and today I'm here with Leah Sizer. Today we're speaking.
Stop 1 second, Liza or Leah. Get closer to Liza a little bit.
I don't bite, you know that.
You're very scary.
Excellent. Start again. Sorry for that.
Okay. From the top.
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Liza Murphy, and today I'm here with Leah Sizer. Today, I said today twice. I'm sorry. I'm really bad at reading. Hello, my name is Liza Murphy, and I'm here with Leah Sizer. Today we're speaking with Keith Walters, a former U.S. military officer who served in Afghanistan. He's here to share his experiences and perspectives on the war. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So to start this off, I would like to ask, sorry.
I can edit this, so you're cool.
Yeah. What am I trying to say?
Why don't you just read the
Tell us a
question?
little bit about yourself.
Oh yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. That's what I was trying to say.
So, like you said, I'm a retired military officer, served 23 years in the U.S. Army, following 4 years at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Following my retirement from the military, I served another 5 years in the U.S. government, but I continued to work in the U.S. foreign policy, U.S. defense strategy space. Been here in Burke, Virginia for about 10 years. The military brought me here to an assignment in the Pentagon, and we've stayed since military retirement, so you know the rest about my family. You know them very well,
Oh yeah.
right? So it's good to be here with you guys.
Yay.
It's good to be here with you.
So, sorry, I didn't write some of these questions.
okay.
Wow.
Sorry. So,
Leah, why don't you fire off a question?
Yes.
yeah.
Can you tell us about what made you want to join the military to start off?
Of course. It goes beyond just tradition in the Walters family, which goes back several generations of service. And my father served 30 years in the United States Air Force from 1951 to 1981. And so there's always been a tradition and sort of a motivation to serve our country.
Mhm.
And I definitely lived that growing up. So I don't think there was ever a doubt that I would serve in some capacity or another. But having the opportunity to be a military officer and to lead American soldiers was something I couldn't pass up when I had the chance to go to West Point when I was choosing colleges way back in the 1990s.
It's not that far. It's not that far. So, what was your reaction to when the U.S. first declared war on Afghanistan? Like, what were your expectations, and did you think you were going to be deployed?
I think in September and October of 2001, anyone who was wearing a uniform had a good idea that there was going to be some sort of action. Since this is a history class, we're talking about declarations of war. There was no formal declaration of war against the sitting government or the sitting rulers of Afghanistan, but we made the choice through various means to go to war in October of 2001. So yes, there was an expectation that you'd go. There was, I think, after the emotions of 9/11 and the initiation of what they called the global war on terror, there was a certain motivation to go. I don't think if you asked anyone who was serving in 2001 that we'd have an idea that we would still be having soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors serving in Afghanistan more than 2 decades later. I don't think anyone would have suspected that. But I think definitely in September, October 2001, there was motivation to serve, and there was certainly, we were ready to go.
What were the conditions like in Afghanistan?
So I can speak specifically to my experiences, but there's a really diverse set of experiences there. Because again, you have a massive operation taking place across a pretty large country. So you have large supply bases, large command and control bases where they run the war out of. Those were in Kabul and those were in Kandahar airfield. So those are the two main large hubs in Afghanistan. And those were largely secure. A lot of the creature comforts of home you would have there, like if you would have bases in Germany or Japan, a lot of the similar creature comforts. I use, access to restaurants, access to choices with food, better gyms. So it was, again, combat environment, so rather comfortable at those bases. As you go further out into the countryside or into the cities where you're operating, it's a little more austere. And so I think my experience is somewhere right in the middle. Again, you got really austere bases that are in the really remote areas in eastern Afghanistan or in northwest Afghanistan. I was situated in Kandahar city, which was the second largest city in Afghanistan, a city of about 800,000 people. Kandahar is often referred to as the spiritual home of the Taliban. It's really the ethnic capital of the Pashtuns. The Pashtuns is the large ethnic group that populates a lot of really southern, southeast Afghanistan and across the Pakistani border into the northern reaches of Pakistan. So the Pashtun ethnic group occupies basically, or situated in two countries with kind of an unnatural political border that kind of divides where the Pashtuns live. So Kandahar city is where we were located in a place called Camp Nathan Smith. It is a large base in the heart of downtown Kandahar city. Not the creature comforts you'd have at the larger bases like Kandahar Airfield or in Kabul. But it was enough to get us by, enough to sustain with ammunition, fuel, food, and enough of the communications gear to get us ready to plan and carry out operations. And not very comfortable beds.
Oh. That's an important detail.
Microphone? Use that microphone, Liza.
Sorry. I low-key forgot we had it. Messing things up. My bad. I swear I'm prepared. I swear. Okay.
I know you are.
So, in what ways were you able to maintain hope throughout the war?
So by 2011, by the time I deployed, I'd been in Iraq in 2004, 2005, slightly different political mission, slightly different military mission, but by the time 2011 rolls around, especially in Kandahar province and Kandahar city, you talk about maintaining hope. The idea, the big picture idea was to maintain security by connecting each smaller unit of governance or society to the larger. You wanted to, the bumper sticker sort of read, connecting the village to the town to the city to the province to the federal government. And that model was sort of based on largely trying to create maybe Western-based, Western-style democratic government. I think that was the ultimate objective. So if that was the political strategic objective, the goal at the local level was to establish an environment where people could live peaceful, secure lives. And so the idea of hope there was to try to impose, I know that's a very aggressive term, but impose or achieve security for the locals across Kandahar city. So if there's any sign of hope, I guess you measured hope by the number of violent incidents that you might have within Kandahar city against the populace. You might measure that by the number of hours per day they had electricity. You might measure that by their access to markets and the markets having access to fresh food for the local populace. In terms of, that's hope at the local level. But I think hope at the political level by 2011 is pretty hard to grasp.
Yeah.
Right, we're deployed 10 years into the conflict with the idea of imposing this sort of Western-style democratic governance on a country that's never really experienced, doesn't have a long history of experiencing or practicing that sort of government. So hope was very fleeting at the political strategic level.
Mm-hmm. Do you think people, like the people of Afghanistan who weren't related to the Taliban, were receiving your idea of political stability?
No, that's a very quick way to put that. But I think the bottom line is I don't think that they were. I think they appreciated efforts for local security, like we would in our neighborhoods, right? We want policing, we want safe environments for our families. I think that's just a human want. I think that's what they sought. Whether it was the United States providing that, whether it was Afghan security forces who were increasingly unable to provide that for their people by 2011. I think all they wanted was security and an opportunity, just like we would, right?
Yeah.
Just like we want secure lives, we want the opportunity to provide for our families. I think that's what they experienced. So I think to the degree that there was security in parts of Kandahar city, they appreciated it. But I do think there was also a widespread and probably accurate belief that violence followed American forces where we were in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that with the withdrawal of American forces that the level of violence that has been visited upon certain parts of Afghanistan. I'm not saying that is a good thing, but I think they also had a certain idea that the Taliban were going to attack U.S. forces where they were, regardless of how healthy the central Afghan government was in Kabul. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, my phone was turning off. Ah.
So earlier you touched on the sort of overarching goal of your deployment, but what duties did you specifically have to reach them?
Yeah, so I served, so the brigade that was in Kandahar City was called the 2nd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division. It was trained as an armored brigade combat team, meaning in the traditional sense we'd have tanks, we'd have armored fighting vehicles, we'd have big 155 millimeter artillery tubes. These formations were designed to fight against other armored formations. Like if you look at the books, you go back to like 1991, Operation Desert Storm. If you go back to the Cold War in Europe, these were forces designed to fight big Russian and Soviet forces in Europe, or North Korean forces in Korea, or other heavy armored forces. So I was the operations officer of the 1st Squadron, 10th Cavalry, which is one of 5 smaller units within that 2nd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division. So the official title is called S3. So in military lingo, that's an operations officer. So basically, I ran all the operations for the squadron that was responsible for about 2/3 of the area of Kandahar City. So as the operations officer, you basically take the higher headquarters mission, which for us was the 10th Mountain Division and the 82nd Airborne Division, who were at that comfortable airfield in Kandahar that I mentioned. But important that they are there in a secure area to be able to command and control really a large area of Afghanistan. So my role was to take the orders from those higher headquarters, kind of figure out what the balance of forces was between my guys, right, and the adversary, which are Taliban operating in different sub-districts across Kandahar, and to figure out how to operate, how we put our forces into the city to take out any insurgent cell activity, provide security for the locals, and to partner with Afghan police and Afghan army units that were themselves responsible for the domestic, the domestic forces responsible for security in Kandahar. So my role was both as a leader of troops that are going out into the battle space, which the battle space is a kind of a military jargon term, meaning out into the city to operate, to plan the future operations, to coordinate with the units that are on the other side of Kandahar City or in other rural parts of Afghanistan, and then to kind of be liaison with the Afghan forces, the police and the Afghan army that are operating in Kandahar. So pretty widespread duties there. But again, had a very good staff of officers and non-commissioned officers working for me there. And then a unit of 5 companies actually, of cavalry troopers and military policemen operating throughout the city. So in total, we're in charge of about 14 to 1,500 soldiers in Kandahar City.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Put that microphone right on there, just like this.
My bad. So we were talking about this earlier, how you weren't necessarily training these people, like they weren't trainees. But what I was gonna ask is, how many people did you train?
Yeah, so the training of those units were the responsibility of other American units operating in different parts of it. So again, that's the formal training where the Afghan police and the Afghan army would recruit from the population, assemble formations, equip the formations, and put them out. And so we had other U.S. forces that were responsible for the actual training. That's teaching them how to shoot, teaching them how to communicate, teaching them how to move, teaching them how to fix their vehicles, teaching them how to supply themselves once they're in combat. Once they were finished training, they were assigned to units that were actually inside Kandahar City. So once they were in Kandahar City, we were with both the police forces and the ANA, which is the Afghan National Army at the time. We partnered with them. So training never really stops, I guess, right? But you're thinking about like recruits and training those guys, that they were beyond that stage. By the time they got with us and we would partner with them, again, these were very raw. These were not forces trained to the standard of the American military or our NATO allies or our Japanese and South Korean allies. These were very primitive, I would say ill-trained, but trained to the level that we thought they needed to be to provide the security across Kandahar City. So by the time they got to us, it was very difficult to coordinate because we have a pretty well-trained American formation that we're leading, and again, pretty ill-trained partners So it was a challenge. So when I say training never stops, when you're operating with them, especially at the platoon level, those are a platoon is at our level is probably 36 to 45 people, and those are led by young second lieutenants right out of the academies, right out of college. I mean, these are 22, 23-year-old officers that are now leading not only their American soldiers, but also partnering with pretty senior Afghan commanders.
Yeah.
And so they're still kind of mentoring and teaching them how to operate within Kandahar City as we go. But it was a challenge because, again, we're there to impose, I keep using the word impose, but impose a certain style of security, and to uphold a certain style of governance that they're not used to. And so the rules of engagement were very strict for U.S. forces, whereas in trying to teach those rules of engagement to Afghan forces, oftentimes it was difficult because these people are, by design, they're drawing people from outside of Kandahar City because the danger in operating in a place like Afghanistan, in a very tribal country with a lot of like tribal rivalries, is to make sure that those forces are upholding the standards for the military forces and not sort of enforcing the maybe some of the tribal grievances or the ethnic grievances that exist. And those are things that we don't really understand in the United States, that these ethnic grievances between the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Pashtuns run very deep. So the way we rally behind the American flag, they don't have that really as central. That the loyalty to the central government was very, very nascent at the time. And I think it remains. It's very difficult to do that because you have so many different competing rivalries with ethnic, religious, tribal, that you have to contend with. So that was also difficult to have them kind of orient on the same type of mission that we were oriented on, which is a national level mission, right? And so that was an extra difficult part. So that training goes beyond just the physical, but it also goes to the sort of the purpose-driven orientation of those forces. And it was a challenge.
It's really annoying how it keeps turning off.
I'm sure Erin Burnett has to deal with the same thing on her teleprompter, right?
We don't have our teleprompter.
Oh, we have one.
Yeah, we're just not using it.
Oh,
Yeah.
This is a much more intimate setting. This is good.
Yeah. Yeah, we own the teleprompter.
What?
Read the question.
Sorry. Were there any specific moments of humanity that stuck out to you during the time you were deployed?
Absolutely, and you can say this about my time in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's, the one thing, there are certain common human emotions. We talked about wanting to have security for family, being able to provide for families. I think every mother, every father you have there is really interested in taking care of their families. That's really a commonality, whether you see it here in Burke, Virginia, or whether you see it in Kandahar, Afghanistan. You have that same desire for families to take care and secure their families. And it's just that's sort of like in sort of the darker moments that sort of gives you hope. Like you asked about hope earlier, like the hope that there is a common thread of humanity that's out there. Like children are children, right? Soccer is the international thing. So, obviously I'm a baseball guy and a basketball and a football guy. You're not going to see that in Afghanistan, but you see soccer all over the place.
Yeah.
And so when you see, in moments where you miss home, where you are trying to, again, you're trying to help a society flourish, you don't have a whole lot of common in terms of food. The language isn't the same, right? The customs are very different, but then you see kids playing soccer on a dust field. Okay, there's something in common. And I think those are very hopeful moments where you see kids able to be out there and playing soccer. So there's that common thread of humanity. We saw that in Iraq, we saw that in Afghanistan. That was very hopeful, but again, I don't want to be too much of a downer here, right? But that hope, when you see that common thread, and then you see others that are able to so quickly kind of extinguish that hope based on how the Taliban operated across Afghanistan, that's sort of, those are the polar ends of the emotional spectrum, right? This hopeful thing of the common thread of humanity, and you just see really, really vile techniques and tactics that the Taliban would use to impose their way of governance on these people that just want security, they just want sustenance. And again, this is not to get into sort of a debate on whether the Sharia vision that the Taliban subscribe to for Islam and Islamic rule is right. It's right for their society maybe, but it certainly didn't it didn't align with our vision of stable societies. And so that those clashes of the cultures that we're bringing, that we're trying to almost impose upon Afghanistan, were certainly not I would say almost irreconcilable to how the Taliban wanted to, how they envisioned their society interacting.
Yeah.
So the tension between those two, you've got the common thread of humanity, and how the humans that are in the middle of this massive ideological fight were impacted. And oftentimes it ended really in some horrifying acts, but even amid all of that violence and some of the more horrific acts the Taliban imposed, there's always a glimmer of hope, and that might exist today even after, after the post-U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have reestablished rule across the country. There might be some glimmers of hope that way. But again, if those families are experiencing the opportunity to provide for security for their families, if it's under Taliban rule, then maybe at the local level, maybe those people are going to be satisfied with that. And that's hard to reconcile after the United States, after our country expended so many lives and so much resource, so much treasure to kind of provide for the Afghan people.
Yeah. You mentioned
Microphone.
when you were talking about the soccer thing earlier, it reminded me of like this. It was Christmas. It was like Christmas Day, and it was World War II. I think two countries stopped fighting, or like two armies stopped fighting just to play soccer together. I just remembered that. That's all I wanted to add. I just thought it was
A lot of
cool.
examples in World War I on
Yeah.
Christmas truces, because their opposing forces were located so close together, right?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where we are. Yeah, I think so too. So, do you think you made a somewhat large impact on the war, directly or indirectly?
I would say that I don't say this in a negative way, as a tool of American foreign policy, which essentially that's what we are. I know we're human beings, but you become tools of American foreign policy. I would say that no, you look at the outcomes, I don't feel like I made much of a difference. And that's just, I don't think the United States in total made much of a difference in Afghanistan. Again, there's a lot of layers to that answer, but the direct answer is no. So I think what you have to, if you're going to rationalize an experience, like kind of a searing life experience like that, you have to kind of characterize it in terms of the lives that you could impact. Right? So some of those kids playing soccer, right? So the soccer balls were provided by U.S. forces, right? So you've got to say, okay, we provided at least some glimmer of happiness, some fleeting moments of happiness for the locals. Some of the aid that was delivered, USAID, we have just literal tons of food shipments, right? American forces helped deliver a lot of food aid to people across Afghanistan. So you have to attach, as you rationalize that experience, to some of those positives that came of that. But at the end of the day, as again a tool of American foreign policy, we accomplished very little. And if you would have asked the same question of a Soviet officer in 1987, the Soviet officer probably would have given you a similar answer. Or if you asked the same question of a British officer in 1880s or 1840s, the British officer probably would have given you the same character of an answer on whether they made a difference for the national objective in Afghanistan. I think that's just the character of how Western forces and Western societies interact with the Pashtuns in Afghanistan. That's just probably going to be the reality of any country that goes in there. So then you have to try to attach it to the lives you've impacted. Like the soldiers we led, right? I think we did our best to make sure that those soldiers were safe, that those soldiers were well trained, that those soldiers were able to carry out the mission. But again, as a leader, you have to motivate people and through hard times, right? Like it's dangerous going out there. Everyone, especially when you're talking 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers who are on their first deployments, it's a scary time. It's frightening. So as a leader, you have to help motivate them. You have to help them make sense of those fears to lead them out and take them out into combat. So you have to attach it to something that's more idealistic, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a really challenging part. So it's almost like you are, I won't say being untruthful, but by 2011, like I said, most of officers going in there, we had a good sense that at the strategic level, the mission was not going well. But you still have to somehow filter all of those doubts, those uncertainties about why we're there, and filter that out so that you can actually lead the soldiers to carry out the missions that you have to do anyways. Because it's not our role to, at that level, to question American policy or American strategy. It's our job to lead the soldiers and do what we're instructed to do, regardless of whether you believe wholeheartedly in the mission or not. Right? So I think that filter I'm talking about probably took place at the level I was at. But that's not to say that the 18 and 19-year-old, these are really smart people. They too have their doubts, right, about what we were doing there. So at the end of the day, we made an impact on those we could impact in our local area, but in the big picture, we didn't make much of an impact.
So, the training soldiers thing didn't like really happen. We talked about that, but were there any moments while you were performing your duties that were particularly difficult?
It's hard to say which stands out because they're all pretty difficult because you're trying to make sense of maybe an ill-conceived larger mission. You're trying to make sense of it. So, without naming names, there's initiatives to, like I said, connecting the populace with higher levels of governance. So you're trying to create this structure of governance. Right here in Fairfax, we have our local, I guess Burke Township has its own council. We tie into Fairfax County, which ties in the state of Virginia, which ties in the federal government. So I think we're trying to impose that sort of structure. It's sort of an artificiality in Afghan society. It didn't work, but you're trying to impose that. So by doing so, there's an idea of community boards. So within each sub-district, these are like neighborhoods. So I'm putting up like boards, like, you see the HOA boards up there. And certain commanders would have us wanting to put information out on these boards. But the problem that I noticed was, what surveys showed that literacy was probably under 20% in our area. So we're saying, no, put up information on these boards, but then you come back to the higher headquarters saying, these people can't read. So we're putting our soldiers in danger by going on patrol with Afghan police and Afghan soldiers to put up these flyers talking about the community, talking about government initiatives for people who can't read. So there's a massive disconnect there, and so that becomes very difficult at my level, where you're trying to convey the risk associated with putting out there for really, which is very limited potential reward for getting that information out there. And there had to be other means, but I think what it reflected was sort of a lack of creativity among American officers, and certainly, I guess the jargon term is mirror imaging. By right here in American society, like this is 2011, I guess, internet's it's pervasive by then in American society, but not so in Afghanistan. There could have been other ways to put information out by 2011. But again, the idea was that just put information out there at the community boards, like you would have at the swimming pool, for events, for activities, and then have the people read them. And just for me, that was very difficult, and that stands out as an experience for me that was just very frustrating, because we had this idea that Afghan society was going to take in and process information the way we would here in the United States, and it was frustrating. So that's a very difficult kind of, I guess, intellectual experience there. As far as physical pieces go, the old adage goes that your platoons, your people on the ground face more of the physical hardships than you do as your higher level officers. I like to think of myself as an officer who was always out with the troops, and I think that my troopers will probably tell you that I was always out there with them, but I didn't experience on a day-to-day basis the same sorts of dangers that I did when I was more junior rank as a company commander in Iraq, for example. Mm-hmm. But these were soldiers that were operating, living out in posts. So I mentioned I was in a place called Camp Nathan Smith, which is a pretty large outpost and command center. A lot of my platoons were out operating inside Kandahar City. They lived at police substations inside Kandahar City, and these are very austere. They're eating those packaged meals. We call them MREs, meals ready to eat. They're eating those quite frequently. They are getting ammunition drops. They're getting fuel drops from the centralized. So they're living in a very unsecure area. So what's a really searing experience is, one of our outposts, as soon as we had left this outpost on, it's called circulation, where again you're going out, you're checking on all of your outposts, and as we were maybe 15 minutes away from this one outpost, we saw a huge mushroom cloud across the city. And at minutes after we left, that outpost was hit with a massive dump truck, suicide vehicle-borne ID that ripped through and just destroyed that outpost and took and killed four soldiers with it. So it's you're always in that kind of danger when you are an operations officer or commander for a large formation, these are your people. So you're always living in that fear. Not necessarily fear, but you're always worried about the lives of all those people that are out there living in more less secure areas. So I think that's a constant stress is on you when you're in a place like that. So that's one more I guess example of physical stressors you face there. Did that answer the question?
I feel
Yeah.
Okay.
He said something. Okay. Few of these say training. That's not what we mean.
It's okay. We'll make sense of it.
Yeah. So were there any moments that stuck with you when you were with the other I forgot what it was called.
The Afghan police or Afghan army? Yeah.
With them.
Yeah, so the use of opioids, right? The opium trade is very central to the economy south and southwest Afghanistan, Kandahar province, and Helmand province. So, certainly there's drug use within the U.S. Army. But it's not pervasive. You're able to have. You're disciplined enough to know that's not the norm. It was very difficult to reconcile with. Again, forces that are pulling from Afghan society. When you would show up to checkpoints or show up to police substations and everyone's high on hashish, on whatever they're processing. They go big. So that's very frustrating. How are they going to do their help provide security for the people while they're all high? They're all incapacitated. So that stands out. That's pretty routine. You also have instances of just on the military side where if our trucks or our Humvees or our MRAPs, those mine resistant vehicles are broken, we have mechanics, right? That's the American side. If our cars in our family are broken, we either fix them or we take mechanics to fix. That's despite the training that wasn't necessarily ingrained in the way our Afghan partners operated. So rather than this happened on a couple of occasions, rather than fixing their trucks, they didn't know how. They would order new trucks and ask us to provide new trucks. They'd run out of fuel instead of asking for fuel. Right? If you're at a quarter tank on your car, you should drive. You're going to go get gas. But these forces would run out of gas and then ask for fuel. And so again, that puts more people in danger by running these logistics operations to refuel trucks and gas. These are just very basic things that we take for granted here, just not in American society, in American military formations that they didn't do. So those types of experiences with the Afghan formation stand out. And then on the very basic military level, they couldn't shoot straight. These are really, I would say that these are rather incompetent forces that we were working with. And it's not out of a lack of effort for the American units that were training with them. Because again, they left Kandahar, they left their training bases certified because we thought they could accomplish the bare bones, basic minimum standard to accomplish their mission. And by the time they got out, they were corrupted by poor leadership, by rampant drug use, and just made it impossible. But that's the experience of and those stand out. They're so emblematic of, I think, not just what our unit experienced, but what every unit across Afghanistan was probably experiencing at the same time. So that added that level of hopelessness at the strategic level.
A little bit more about that. Is there like do you think that do you think the people before they were sent to you were is it how do I say this? Do you think the people who were trained before they were sent to you? Do you think that group of people or person was knowingly sending them off without them being properly trained or?
No, I think they were doing the best they could. They're doing the best they could, but there's also timelines. Again, this talk about the hierarchy. We are promising the American people progress, right? However we measure progress on security, and we are promising in 2011 a gradual handoff of security requirements to Afghan forces. That was the whole idea. Like the whole idea behind these surges in Iraq and Afghanistan is that you would increase the presence and the role of the U.S. forces to establish a baseline level of security, and then you start handing it off to the indigenous, the Afghan forces. And so the idea was get as many of these security forces out into the line as you could. So the people that are doing the training, they're under a lot of pressure to live up to that. Because again, as you go up the higher the chain of command, eventually at the 4-star general level, the commander has to tell the national security advisor and the president, hey, yes, we are meeting mission, we're meeting mission. That's probably an entirely different topic, maybe on this interview, but I think there's probably some dishonesty, and I don't say dishonesty in terms of lying. I use kind of intellectual dishonesty at that level. Where certain leaders were unable to tell the next higher level, which goes all the way up to the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, even the President, unable to tell them and give them an accurate read of the potential of the Afghan forces we were training. So are we meeting the number? Yes. If the number was 150,000 every 3 months, I don't recall if that's the number. But if say the number was 150,000 new Afghan soldiers on the line every 3 months, well, we were meeting 150,000. And so because of the pressures to get those people back out of the line. But were they necessarily the best trained? Probably not. But those people that were doing the training were doing the best they could. They weren't given a whole lot, right? The raw material to turn into soldiers, again, was not all that great. But I do think there was a lack of maybe moral courage that's taking place at various levels up the chain of command at the multiple star level. Where people were kind of given a more optimistic view than they probably should have. Because on the ground, there was never cause for optimism.
Mm-hmm. It'll be awkward handing it back and forth.
It's not awkward.
So, were you close to any of the formations?
We were. Yes, we were. So we would partner with headquarters of Afghan National Army Corps level formations. So we would often run combined command posts with them to provide security, especially for big events. There were a couple of big United Nations brokered events in Kandahar where they were attempting to bring together religious and tribal leaders from across Afghanistan to really negotiate and trying to find some unity against the Taliban. And so in those instances, we had to work pretty closely with some Afghan forces. In kind of an odd twist, in Kandahar province, the higher headquarters became pretty tight with a general named Razik. And I think we could probably have a 3-hour discussion about Abdul Razik. But he was, if you would look at I think Harper's Magazine, maybe New York Times had done a lot of profiles on Razik, who was a local warlord who became sort of a celebrity in Kandahar province because he was able to impose security in a very medieval way that is not acceptable to any Western standard on how to impose security. And this is a person that would visit extreme violence on the Taliban. And I don't want to, again, this is a high school project, so I don't want to talk about the types of things this person would do to impose security and to deter the Taliban from operating. But he was a very, very corrupt, very, very violent beyond like the human norms that we accept here in Western society. But he was making some progress where he was allowed to operate, and therefore a lot of American officers looked the other way and basically accepted his rule here. And it was, even as a relatively, I wouldn't say junior officer, but as a field grade is kind of the middle grade officer where I was serving there, it really did not sit right with me and a lot of my peers that we were actually collaborating with Abdul Razik. So when you asked if we got close to them, we certainly did, and it was very unfortunate and very regretful that the Americans collaborated with someone like Razik. I regret having worked with him.
Okay. You already answered the next one, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So, can you describe the challenges and rewards of working with the soldiers, like, especially in high-stress environments?
With the Afghan soldiers?
Yeah.
So, the rewards, like I kind of I've been alluding to are sort of fleeting. There were moments where, okay, again, you have a number of police substations, a number of Afghan bases that you're trying to establish across Kandahar city, again, with the goal of providing security, providing a visible presence that both deters the Taliban, or if the Taliban are going to launch some sort of offensive, that they're actually physically able to stop the offensive and defend Kandahar city. And so, the reward was getting units out there that were, fulfilling the number, right? The number requirements to get them out there. We have this in the military, we have this kind of fascination with green, amber, and red charts. Green meaning good, right? Amber meaning getting good, red meaning bad. Like, this is a visual that it's kind of become a meme across the military. Mm-hmm. Like, everyone wants to get to green. So you'd get to green by the numbers, but then if you looked anywhere behind the numbers and said that the ability of them to do their mission, it would be red throughout. Mm-hmm. These were incapable. So the reward that you'd want to get to was security, and then getting American troops back out and having them really come off the lines so that the Afghan forces would have the lead. But it was more and more difficult during our deployments that went along to kind of hand that off. So I think that probably gets to the spirit of your question, but the frustrations were consistently, as I laid out, that they were unable to fulfill the basic tasks, and their leaders were quite corrupt.
Yeah.
And again, like, I want to be a human about it and say, okay, again, it's hard to rationalize corruption, right? Because like the ethic that we believe in, that we subscribe to, or that we, especially as officers, we endure the hardships of our men and women. We endure the hardships even worse if we're officers. We're supposed to lead from the front, and we're supposed to provide for our soldiers. And we didn't see that out of Afghan leaders. We saw them using their rank to be able to funnel money, to impose really harsh punishment on soldiers unfairly. And it was really a massive disconnect between the way we view leadership and the way they did. So those are some frustrations that really got in the way of any potential reward.
What was the most difficult aspect of balancing your other deployment duties with your work with the soldiers?
It eventually became one and the same, right? The deployment duties were like I had mentioned, to kind of run and supervise the operations across about 2/3 of Kandahar city, and increasingly, like I said, we're trying to make them the face of the security effort. It was never going to work. Right, in this whole counterinsurgency theory that was very popular at the time, the idea was to partner with the indigenous forces, indigenous being the Afghan forces, then have them be take the lead. Because at the end of the day, a source of the insurgency was the American presence in the first place, right? Now, we knew that we were trying to eradicate Taliban influence across Kandahar province and across the country. That was the top level mission. But whether they would accept the Americans being the visible force providing security, that was probably never going to happen, especially if you look at the history of the British and the Soviets, or any other outside powers in what is the Pashtun area. So that was never going to happen. So we tried to push the Afghan forces to the forefront. That was the role. That was the mission. That was the collateral duties. That was everything we're trying to do, is then establish security with increasingly Afghan face.
Sorry. How did you adapt your training methods? Or they weren't really training methods. How did you adapt with working with these people? To I feel as though this question no longer works. Anyways, moving on.
No, I mean, I think talking about adaptation,
Yeah.
it becomes a case of the theme was mirror imaging. I talked about that, and trying to, the expectation that we would create forces that looked like us, that operated like us. And I think that was a false assumption that we had. And I think, we experienced this in Iraq too. So you just remember, in 2011, there's still forces in Iraq doing the same thing with the Iraqi army. But I think the difference was in Iraq, we were able to take indigenous forces with some military experience. Eventually, we started bringing people with military experience back into the fold, and so there was some tradition of of a conventional type military structure. That you were able to, it wasn't so foreign to the Iraqi society to build a force that looks somewhat like us. It's still challenging, but there's still some sort of tradition there. In Afghanistan, you're trying to build it from scratch. And just the idea that you wanted to build something that looks like us, it was never going to happen, right? And so the adaptation that we're talking about, we were never able to adapt because we doubled down and we pushed to try to make these formations look like ours, and it was just never going to happen. So I keyed on adaptation in that question here because this adaptation was lacking on our part.
Sort of a switch in topic. Can you walk us through the day you were shot by one of the soldiers? What happened and how did you respond?
Yeah, so that's part of one of the United Nations sponsored missions. It's called Ulama. They were trying to assemble a group of tribal and religious leaders in Kandahar city again to find some way to build a coalition to oppose the Taliban. The idea, again, making an Afghan face, was to have Afghan local leadership participate in the effort to kind of push Taliban influence out. So we were running a United Nations brokered mission in downtown Kandahar city. And so again, we had Afghan police, Afghan army, Afghan commandos, and Afghan security services all operating with me in downtown Kandahar. So I'm running the outpost. We have extremely tight security on the outsides running in. And so again, these are people that we've grown to partner with. Like in a question a couple of minutes ago, you asked about that. So these were units that we had worked with on other operations. We'd done a similar operation about 2 weeks prior to provide security, to increase security across Kandahar city. And so this is what we were doing in October 2011, in early October 2011, trying to build that security forces. So again, these are joint command posts. We have American soldiers, American officers sitting with Afghan officers, and just monitoring the days of activities. Turns out that the increased presence of Afghan and U.S. forces there was very little violence. There were a couple, as I recall, there were a couple instances of contact, meaning exchanges of fires across Kandahar city that day, but nothing out of the ordinary. So it seemed like a pretty routine day. Kind of context-wise, across other parts of Helmand province, Kandahar province, and up north, a tactic that the insurgents had been adopting, the Taliban had been adopting, were to initiate attacks on U.S. or coalition bases with either a vehicle-borne IED or some sort of rocket-propelled grenade attack in order to both breach a hole in the physical security of the forces, and then to storm through the breach with small arms fire, with people armed with AK-47s or RPK machine guns. And so we were very attuned to that technique. So that night after, I guess, our partners, it kind of struck me as odd that at a certain time, again, call to prayer time, there's certain times that there are different cultural norms, they're going to behave differently. But when all of these Afghan partners pulled back at a certain point in my command post, leaving just a few of them with us, we said, okay, we're going to raise our security level. We're sort of alert to something odd was going on. We were doing a kind of a mission brief with my officers for the next day's mission and talking a little long term about security. Then the techniques that the Taliban were using, I had mentioned, happened. Large explosion. So immediately, I hear a large explosion. Here we go. I think those were my words that the report says. Here we go. And so we all go to get our weapons because our security forces outside are starting to engage. But then the firing starts coming into our command post. And so a command post it's a tent, but it looks large. It's well lit. There's computers, there's screens. You're operating. So before we could even respond, fire starts coming into our command post. So we didn't even have time to kind of establish that interior security once that started. So it turned out that it wasn't an outside force. It wasn't a Taliban trying to infiltrate. It was one of our partners. The lingo is green on blue. Green being the description of our partner forces, blue being U.S. forces. And so it was a case of, again, it was a Taliban infiltrator who had infiltrated the unit that we were working with. and it opened fire on us. So one of his partners fired a rocket propelled grenade at our one of our security towers, and then one of his other partners started, or two of his other partners started shooting into our command post, and so ended up killing two of my battle captains and wounding about 5 or 6 others.
We're glad you're okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry. So, what was going through your mind, like, in the immediate aftermath of the incident? And, like, how did it affect your perspective on your role as officer?
Well, in the immediate moment, you want to reestablish security, and you want to make sure that your guys are taken care of, right? And so you're trying to, I was hit, but I recall just making sure guys are getting on the radios, make sure the guys are starting to call in the medical evacuation on the radios, trying to make sure to coordinate security otherwise. Because you have a non-commissioned officer, a senior sergeant in charge too, and that sergeant fortunately was not wounded. So the sergeant got on the radio, and we started trying to reestablish security. Again, not knowing exactly at the time, really in the first few moments of this, you don't know, right? When you're taking fire, right, the expectation was not that you take fire from the people that you're working with, that you've gotten accustomed with. The expectation is that you are taking fire from outside. So the whole idea going through my mind is establish the outside perimeter to kind of regain the initiative against whatever attack was happening against us. But, the firing stopped, right? And because the shooters fled. So once the shooting stopped, and once after a couple moments you realize, okay, that's probably it. Then you start doing the triage. Our medics were fantastic. We had one of our medics was wounded. Actually, in that explosion was a rocket propelled grenade fired at our ambulance truck. So that part of the attack wounded one of my medics. But fortunately, I had a few other medics that were quickly taking care of the wounded soldiers. So at that point, once you knew that it was relatively secure, because then we had our own security force now kind of figuring things, what had happened, and sort of isolating our part within the Afghan base. Then we got on the radio and started coordinating the medical evacuation, which were evac helicopters out of Kandahar Airfield. Mm-hmm. And so, you're wounded, but your role continues, right? You're still in charge. You're still responsible for all of those. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, you don't have, I knew that one of my guys was gone. I knew that one of my guys was hurt pretty bad, but you still have to focus in on the larger mission. Seems kind of impersonal when you've got to focus on a larger mission versus just, the well-being of one person. But that's just the way we're trained, right? That the mission has to persist as long as you guys are taken care of. And as soon as we knew that the medical evacuation was inbound, then you sort of hand it off to your non-commissioned officers who were in charge.
When you think that...
Switch cards.
Good questions. It's good flow.
It is. It was a really awkward time for the card to run out there.
Sorry.
It's all your fault.
Wow.
The way it works.
Why do you have so many? Oh, right, because you clear yours out.
But this happens in Hollywood too, I'm sure. The editing makes it seem like there's nothing.
It's true. It's true.
It's an art.
What?
Continue and darken.
What? Okay. Okay. So wouldn't it be like if you were to focus on one individual person, wouldn't more people get hurt in the process of that?
So in an instance like that, right, when you are under contact, you have to reestablish, right? You have to reestablish, I won't use all the jargon, but you will firepower dominance. You want to get positions of advantage. But that's on a conventional sort of defense against if someone's attacking you. But in an occasion like this, though, again, it's internal. The shooters fled, and eventually we had some people from the guard tower come down and say they were from inside the base. So then you start getting an idea of kind of the character, the nature of the attack. So it's a little bit different. And once your medics are working on the wounded soldiers, the medical evacuation helicopters are on the way. Then you can sort of trying to make sense of the situation, a little better sense of the situation. So yeah, you're obviously worried about the individual people, but you know that your medics are doing their jobs. And that's something about the training model of U.S. forces that, in stressful situations like that, everyone fulfilled the mission they were trained to do, and they did so very well. And that's a very different. I'd say that's what sets U.S. forces apart from a lot of forces across the world, right? Is because there's this model of professionalism that our sergeants and our officers have to kind of train their soldiers, prepares you for moments like that. And that's why, as an officer, once we knew that the situation was sort of under control, it's comforting to have your subordinate officers and your non-commissioned officers who are going to carry out their roles, even though it's a high-stress situation. And that's why that sort of made it possible for the senior man on the ground, which was me, to kind of know that my guys were going to take care of the situation.
So, in hindsight, do you think there was a way or hints for you to know about this attack, about this like green on blue thing that was going to happen?
In hindsight, I thought about that, quite a bit. Saw the official investigation, which basically showed that there was no way. But there's instinctive things that you reflect on, like, were there signs? Could you have figured that out? We had some light moments of tea throughout the day with the partners that were there. All right, so there's Hazaras and Uzbeks, and we were kind of just, it was really lighthearted. The camaraderie seemed good. So to run up there, I don't think so. I mentioned that a lot of our partners, the officers, our Afghan partners who were with us that evening, started departing within about a 15 to 20 minute period, and I said that sort of alerted us that something odd was going on. I don't think that alerted me to the fact that there would be a green on blue attack. I mean, there had been a number. Again, the number of green on blues across Afghanistan spiked. Like, we were part of the uptick in those sorts of attacks that happened from late 2011 all the way through 2012. It was happening pretty frequently, but we were still on the upswing of that trend in Afghanistan at the time. So we knew there was a possibility, and that's why we were sort of alert to it. But I still don't know if I think we had everything in place local security-wise to kind of prevent something like that. Except this one was so close. Right? Because a lot of those other green on blue attacks that were taking place across the country were, with training formations, like we talked about, formations that are training, or in partner units that are not intermixed. Like, it's an Afghan part of a command post with an American part of the command post. Ours, but we were literally intermixed with our Afghan partners at the time. So there were certain signs, again, that I wish maybe we would have been more alert to that. But again, if you would have, and this is the kind of the dilemma. If you're going to act on some instinctive thought that something's wrong, and you're going to accuse them, you're going to remove them from your command post, then you're undermining the very mission that you're there for, right? If the idea was to partner with Afghan forces in order to push them out in the front eventually, by breaking that bond, you are sort of undermining that mission. And that's a true dilemma that I've reflected on over a number of years since that happened. But again, I think it speaks to the larger disconnect from reality of the American goals of creating a force that looked like us, that was able to impose some sort of security in some Western style tradition that just was not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Time out.
Do we have a long ways to go? Because we're going to start to run into the tape limits.
We're almost done. That's 3 questions left.
Yeah.
I'm long-winded.
It's good, man.
I'm sorry. I'm
These
creating
girls are getting an
I'm creating a
education.
project editing problem for you guys.
No, it's good. It's good. We need a lot of footage.
We did.
We'll have voiceover stuff too. Cause didn't we spend 6 hours recording a 30-second ad?
I don't know if it was 6, but when you and I did it, it was on Easter, so I was probably...
We spent a long time
Yeah.
recording a 30-second ad. What was it called? A politician. It's on school safety. So, yeah. She looked kind of funky. She did. She did.
You're very polite.
Yeah, I know.
Home point updated.
I thought you were renting that lens.
Nope.
Oh. Oh, I'm thinking of a different one.
Lenses do you
There's like 80 for 80 different things. I think we have like 6. Yeah. That one's he rents one for long range
have? Mm-hmm.
because I'm in Peru and he's far away. I have a 2K today. I'm actually gonna cry. I hate 2Ks. You know? Are Nate and Matt gonna do crew?
Probably not.
That makes sense.
They're doing track. Well, Matt's doing track,
Mhm.
and maybe do baseball, maybe football.
Alright, then I'm doing basketball because I know, like, if he does baseball, he can do winter conditioning for crew. I have to recruit people.
You should do some,
I have to recruit people.
because it's the same season as cross country. Because Matt will do cross country.
When is cross country?
It's a fall sport. I'm not sure if it aligns perfectly with the season, but
So if it's fall, does it go into winter?
I think so.
He can do spring season. We have all year.
You can recruit.
We
Have
all
at
year.
it. Have at it.
Yeah.
All right, Liza, you,
Okay. What?
you're
Okay.
good to go, but we'll want to wrap it up so we don't lose anything in the
Yep.
end.
You get.
We're almost done. Do you want us to finish questions or just?
No, we have finished the interview,
Okay.
just,
Cool. So, last question on this specific thing. How did the military respond to the incident? Like, what kind of support did you get? What kind of support did you get? Like mental, emotional,
Yeah.
physical?
So again, almost 10 years into the war in Afghanistan, and the military healthcare system had adapted very well. That, and you talk about of mental health and physical recovery, did very well. I think so. I was evacuated to Kandahar Airfield. Then after initial, I was taken to Kabul and Bagram Airfield, and evacuated to Landstuhl, which is in Germany, which is the regional hospital. Then back here to Walter Reed. So like the acute medical care, like the medics that we trained, the medics that were on site, and then the next levels of medical care were outstanding. I think I'm just one example of thousands over the course of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that they treat, but they applied new medical technology and excellent training. They saved a lot of American lives and Allied lives, not just American lives, a lot of Allied lives over the course of the war. So that acute line medical care was outstanding. Really, nothing to worry about. Over the longer haul, once again, I'm a pretty physical person, so I want to run, I want to get back into it. So once you get it back in the regular medical system, maybe there's a little left to be desired in the military healthcare system. But as far as offering the provision of mental health support was always there. So again, this is a huge adaptation for the military establishment from the post-Vietnam era, right? This was a generational change in the way they took care of both the physical and sort of the kind of the psychological outcomes of war. So I think that's a very positive outcome, I think, of the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So, how did this incident affect your view of training and other similar programs within the military?
So I was a skeptic of the Iraq War to start. Again, in 2003, I'm a captain, company commander. You don't get paid, nor are you in the appropriate place in the chain of command to question any of that. You just do your mission. You carry it out to the best of your ability, and that's the way. This is why we work as a military establishment in the society that we have today, right? Afghanistan's a different question, right? We were armed with a lot of historical references for outside powers going into and trying to reshape Afghanistan. I think if you talked about the mission that we were accomplishing, one of your first questions was expectations and readiness to do what we did in September and October of 2001. We absolutely, the United States military and the intelligence community absolutely accomplished what it set out to do initially. Did they capture bin Laden, who was like the physical representation of what we're trying to do there? No, it took another several years for them to do that, right? But I think if you were to destroy the foundations, the kind of the societal base for Al-Qaeda and those that launched the 9/11 attacks and built, destroying the infrastructure they had in Afghanistan, their training bases, then we did so. But I think what has happens a lot in any great power over time is that those strategic objectives evolve. And so it went from eradicating the training bases and logistics bases for the Taliban for Al Qaeda through the Taliban to building a Western style society that would, right, nominally not ever be a venue for terrorist training in the future, right? So that massive expansion of goals sort of like took us out of the realm of something that was achievable, right, measurable and achievable in military terms. And so, my skepticism, I think, was warranted. I think history so far has borne that out. That, I think, and I'm not the only military officer who was skeptical of what we were trying to do or what we said we were trying to do in Afghanistan. But I think that's, unfortunately, history has shown that to be accurate.
Mm-hmm.
1 second, Liza.
Do you want to storage again? Oh.
No, we're good, guys. Just want to make sure that we're crystal.
We have one question left.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are good questions, guys.
We wrote them like 3 months ago. We didn't know when they were due, so we just did it.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we weren't doing this at the last minute. You have a little bit of time to process it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it due in a few weeks?
The raw footage is due after winter break. Or not spring break.
Okay, so you got a couple weeks there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know you travel for spring break usually. So
We are this year, yeah.
yeah, where are you going?
We're going to Grand Canyon, Sequoia, and Yosemite, and San Francisco.
Nice.
Oh.
That's all
What do you
places.
guys
I
do?
know.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Okay, so what advice would you give to future soldiers about like staying vigilant and managing the unexpected in their careers?
So we can talk about the careers. We can talk about just like a thematic piece here. So staying vigilant, I think that's just all about preparation. And so you're able to stay vigilant because you're prepared. Right? Being vigilant implies just preparation, right? Having an idea of what's possible, what possibly could happen. So I think that is so implicit in every approach to and every way you carry out training in the military. It's called contingency planning, of being aware of things that could happen that don't go according to plan. And so I think that goes down to the individual level, but also as you go up the chain and as you assume leadership positions, of having an idea of the potential paths any operation can take. So that's like at the tactical level what you're doing. You got to just be prepared. You've got to train for all the contingencies. You have to rehearse. It's preparation. That's why I think there's a lot of sports metaphors to the military. Is that preparation means you're able to execute, means you're able to stay vigilant for all the different contingencies that can happen. So I think that's sort of like implicit, and that's something I would advise. I mean, it's almost that training itself is not a philosophy, but the idea of repetition, the idea of making sure that you hone those skills is so important to everything you do in the military. It really translates to just about everything we do in life, right? Mm-hmm. You talked about careers, though. I'll say vigilant. That's a hard thing because, when you're in the military, certain people join the military with aspirations to be generals and admirals someday, right? And that was never me. Like, you want to, it sort of sounds kind of idealistic, but you just want to do well in what you're doing. You want to be the best you can be at what you're doing, and that's what I would, advise looking back, and just stay focused on what you're doing. Don't worry about the next job, because if you do well at what you're doing now, and if you take care of your people, they'll take care of you, right? If you treat your people with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of respect, a lot of respect actually, and you treat them like human beings, they will come back and take care of you. That's something that was, I was fortunate because my people took care of me. in every way. Just, you know, the physical ways we just talked about, they took care of me, but also in the figurative ways, just being good teammates, of being good people to work with. They took care of you. And so if you have people that take care of you, and you do the best you can at your job, well, the next job and the next promotion is going to take care of itself, right? And I think that stands in opposition to a lot of, you know, times where people are just always seeking that next piece. They're not focusing on where they are at the moment. Obviously, you have to have some ambition, right? In anything in life, you have to have some ambition. But if the ambition is the overriding motivator rather than being the best you can be at the job you're doing at the time, then that sort of imbalance can get you in trouble. And that's sort of the advice I would give to people joining the military, is just be the best you can be at the job and take care of your people. Mm-hmm. It's not just a bumper sticker.
Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Mhm.
Really appreciate it. I learned a lot.
I did too.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about war, so.
You guys are a good duo. You're a good
Yes.
interview duo.
Yes.
You have a talk show someday.
Maybe not that far.
No,
Maybe
no,
not that
let's
far.
move on.
Nah.
A podcast. Start with a podcast.
We did a podcast for English already.
Yeah,
We can do a
Okay.
podcast.
We'll make it a regular thing.
Oh, maybe not.
we can now.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
We good?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, outstanding.
It's a wrap.
Yay!
Is that you do that thing? Yeah.
My butt low-key hurts.
That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Good work, guys.
Thank you. My mommy just texted me saying the house is open because the interview's done.
Just let
Okay.
me know.
All right.
Anyways,
Well, thanks,
thank
guys.
you so much.
Keith, what do you have on your schedule for the rest of the day? You want to go grab some tacos? Girls, you want to get some tacos?
First, I got to take the three kids to the dentist.
They do baseball.
I scheduled on the day off. The three kids are not very happy about that.
You did?
The kids aren't happy about me scheduling dentist appointment on the day off.
I don't blame